The Analects of Confucius, translated into English by William Jennings. Introduction. The strangest figure that meets us in the annals of Oriental thought is that of Confucius. To the popular mind he is the founder of a religion, and yet he has nothing in common with the great religious teachers of the East. We think of Siddhartha, the founder of Buddhism, as the very impersonation of romantic asceticism, enthusiastic self-sacrifice, and faith in the things that are invisible. Zoroaster is the friend of God, talking face to face with the Almighty, and drinking wisdom and knowledge from the lips of omniscience. Mohammed is represented as snatched up into heaven, where he receives the divine communication which he is bidden to propagate with fire and sword throughout the world. These great teachers lived in an atmosphere of the supernatural. They spoke with the authority of inspired prophets. They brought the unseen world close to the minds of their disciples. They spoke positively of immortality, of reward or punishment beyond the grave. The present life they despised, the future was to them everything in its promised satisfaction. The teachings of Confucius were of a very different sort. Throughout his whole writings he has not even mentioned the name of God. He declined to discuss the question of immortality. When he was asked about spiritual beings, he remarked, "If we cannot even know men, how can we know spirits?" Yet this was the man the impress of whose teaching has formed the national character of 500 millions of people. A temple to Confucius stands to this day in every town and village of China. His precepts are committed to memory by every child from the tenderest age, and each year at the Royal University of Peking the emperor holds a festival in honor of the illustrious teacher. The influence of Confucius springs, first of all, from the narrowness and definiteness of his doctrine. He was no transcendentalist, and never meddled with supramundane things. His teaching was of the earth, earthy. It dealt entirely with the common relations of life, and the golden rule he must necessarily have stumbled upon as the most obvious canon of his system. He strikes us as being the great Stoic of the East, for he believed that virtue was based on knowledge of a man's own heart, and knowledge of humankind. There is a pathetic resemblance between the accounts given of the death of Confucius and the death of Zeno. Both died almost without warning in dreary hopelessness, without the ministrations of either love or religion. This may be a mere coincidence, but the lives and teachings of both men must have led them to look with indifference upon such an end. For Confucius in his teaching treated only of man's life on earth, and seems to have had no ideas with regard to the human lot after death. If he had any ideas, he preserved an inscrutable silence about them. As a moralist, he prescribed the duties of the king and of the father, and advocated the cultivation by the individual man of that rest or apathy of mind, which resembles so much the disposition aimed at by the Greek and Roman Stoic. Even as a moralist, he seems to have sacrificed the ideal to the practical, and his loose notions about marriage, his tolerance of concubinage, the slight emphasis which he lays on the virtue of veracity, of which indeed he does not seem himself to have been particularly studious in his historic writings, place him low down in the rank of moralists. Yet he taught what he felt the people could receive, and the flat mediocrity of his character and his teachings has been stamped forever upon the people who, while they are kindly, gentle, forbearing, and full of family piety, are palpably lacking not only in the exaltation of mysticism, but in any religious feeling, generally so called. The second reason that made the teaching of Confucius so influential is based on the circumstances of the time. When this thoughtful, earnest youth awoke to the consciousness of life about him, he saw that the abuses under which the people groaned sprang from the feudal system, which cut up the country into separate territories, over which the power of the king had no control. China was in the position of France in the years preceding Philip August. excepting that there were no places of sanctuary and no truths of God. The great doctrine of Confucius was the unlimited despotism of the emperor, and his moral precepts were intended to teach the emperor how to use his power aright. But the emperor was only typical of all those in authority, the feudal duke, the judge on the bench, and the father of the family. Each could discharge his duties aright only by submitting to the moral discipline which Confucius prescribed. A vital element in this system is its conservatism, its adherence to the imperial idea. As James I said, "No bishop, no king," so the imperialists of China have found in Confucianism the strongest basis for the throne, and have supported its dissemination accordingly. The Analects of Confucius contain the gist of his teachings, and is worthy of study. We find in this work most of the precepts which his disciples have preserved and recorded. They form a code remarkable for simplicity, even crudity, and we are compelled to admire the force of character, the practical sagacity, the insight into the needs of the hour, which enabled Confucius, without claiming any divine sanction, to impose this system upon his countrymen. The name Confucius is only the Latinized form of two words which mean Master K'ung. He was born 551 B.C., his father being governor of Shandong. He was married at 19, and seems to have occupied some minor position under the government. In his 24th year he entered upon the 3 years' mourning for the death of his mother. His seclusion gave him time for deep thought and the study of history, and he resolved upon the regeneration of his unhappy country. By the time he was 30, he became known as a great teacher, and disciples flocked to him. But he was yet occupied in public duties, and rose through successive stages to the office of chief judge in his own country of Lu. His tenure of office is said to have put an end to crime, and he became the idol of the people in his district. The jealousy of the feudal lords was roused by his fame as a moral teacher and a blameless judge. Confucius was driven from his home, and wandered about with a few disciples until his 69th year, when he returned to Lu, after accomplishing a work which has borne fruit, such as it is, to the present day. He spent the remaining 5 years of his life in editing the odes and historic monuments in which the glories of the ancient Chinese dynasty are set forth. He died in his 73rd year, 478 B.C. There can be no doubt that the success of Confucius has been singularly great, owing especially to the narrow scope of his scheme, which has become crystallized in the habits, usages, and customs of the people. Especially has it been instrumental in consolidating the empire, and in strengthening the power of the monarch, who, as he every year burns incense in the red-walled temple at Peking, utters sincerely the invocation, "Great art thou, O perfect sage! Thy virtue is full, thy doctrine complete. Among mortal men there has not been thine equal. All kings honor thee. Thy statutes and laws have come gloriously down. Thou art the pattern in this imperial school. Reverently have the sacrificial vessels been set out. Full of awe, we sound our drums and bells." End of introduction. Book I of the Analects of Confucius. The Analects. On Learning. Miscellaneous Sayings. "To learn," said the Master, "and then to practice opportunely what one has learned, does not this bring with it a sense of satisfaction? To have associates in study coming to one from distant parts, does not this also mean pleasure in store? And are not those who, while not comprehending all that is said, still remain not unpleased to hear, men of the superior order?" A saying of the scholar Yu: "It is rarely the case that those who act the part of true men in regard to their duty to parents and elder brothers are at the same time willing to turn currishly upon their superiors. It has never yet been the case that such as desire not to commit that offense have been men willing to promote anarchy or disorder. Men of superior mind busy themselves first in getting at the root of things, and when they have succeeded in this, the right course is open to them. Well, are not filial piety and friendly subordination among brothers a root of that right feeling which is owing generally from man to man?' The Master observed, 'Rarely do we meet with the right feeling due from one man to another where there is fine speech and studied meaning.' The scholar Tsang once said of himself, 'On 3 points I examine myself daily, viz., whether, in looking after other people's interests, I have not been acting wholeheartedly; whether, in my intercourse with friends, I have not been true; and whether, after teaching, I have not myself been practising what I have taught.' The Master once observed that to rule well one of the larger states meant strict attention to its affairs and conscientiousness on the part of the ruler, careful husbanding of its resources, with at the same time a tender care for the interests of all classes, and the employing of the masses in the public service at suitable seasons. 'Let young people,' said he, 'show filial piety at home, respectfulness towards their elders when away from home; let them be circumspect, be truthful; their love going out freely towards all, cultivating good will to men; and if in such a walk there be time or energy left for other things, let them employ it in the acquisition of literary or artistic accomplishments.' The disciple Tsz hiŠ said, 'The appreciation of worth in men of worth, thus diverting the mind from lascivious desires; ministering to parents while one is the most capable of so doing; serving one's ruler when one is able to devote himself entirely to that object; being sincere in one's language in intercourse with friends: this I certainly must call evidence of learning, though others may say there has been no learning.' Sayings of the Master: 'If the great man be not grave, he will not be revered, neither can his learning be solid. Give prominent place to loyalty and sincerity. Have no associates in study who are not advanced somewhat like yourself. When you have erred, be not afraid to correct yourself.' A saying of the scholar Tsang: 'The virtue of the people is renewed and enriched when attention is seen to be paid to the departed, and the remembrance of distant ancestors kept and cherished.' Tsz k'in put his query to his fellow disciple Tsz kung. Said he, 'When our master comes to this or that state, he learns without fail how it is being governed. Does he investigate matters, or are the facts given him?' Tsz kung answered, 'Our master is a man of pleasant manners, and of probity, courteous, moderate, and unassuming. It is by his being such that he arrives at the facts. Is not his way of arriving at things different from that of others?' A saying of the Master: 'He who, after 3 years' observation of the will of his father when alive, or of his past conduct if dead, does not deviate from that father's ways, is entitled to be called a dutiful son.' Sayings of the scholar Yu: 'For the practice of the rules of propriety, one excellent way is to be natural. This naturalness became a great grace in the practice of kings of former times. Let every one, small or great, follow their example. It is not, however, always practicable; and it is not so in the case of a person who does things naturally, knowing that he should act so, and yet who neglects to regulate his acts according to the rules. When truth and right are hand in hand, a statement will bear repetition. When respectfulness and propriety go hand in hand, disgrace and shame are kept afar off. Remove all occasion for alienating those to whom you are bound by close ties, and you have them still to resort to.' A saying of the Master: 'The man of greater mind who, when he is eating, craves not to eat to the full; who has a home, but craves not for comforts in it; who is active and earnest in his work and careful in his words; who makes towards men of high principle, and so maintains his own rectitude, that man may be styled a devoted student.' Tsz kung asked, 'What say you, sir, of the poor who do not cringe and fawn, and what of the rich who are without pride and haughtiness?' "They are passable," the Master replied, "yet they are scarcely in the same category as the poor who are happy and the rich who love propriety." In the Book of the Odes, Tsz kung went on to say, we read of one "polished as by the knife and file, the graving tool, the smoothing stone." Does that coincide with your remark?" "Ah, such as you," replied the Master, "may well commence a discussion on the Odes. If one tell you how a thing goes, you know what ought to come." "It does not greatly concern me," said the Master, "that men do not know me. My great concern is, my not knowing them." [Footnote on Rules of Propriety. An important part of a Chinaman's education still. The text-book, the Li Ji, contains rules for behavior and propriety for the whole life, from the cradle to the grave. End of Book 1. Book 2 of the Analects of Confucius. Good government, filial piety, the superior man. Sayings of the Master: "Let a ruler base his government upon virtuous principles, and he will be like the pole star, which remains steadfast in its place while all the host of stars turn towards it." The Book of Odes contains 300 pieces, but one expression in it may be taken as covering the purport of all, with delicate, unswerving mindfulness. To govern simply by statute, and to reduce all to order by means of pains and penalties, is to render the people evasive, and devoid of any sense of shame. To govern upon principles of virtue, and to reduce them to order by the rules of propriety, would not only create in them the sense of shame, but would moreover reach them in all their errors. When I attained the age of 15, I became bent upon study. At 30, I was a confirmed student. At 40, naught could move me from my course. At 50, I comprehended the will and decrees of heaven. At 60, my ears were attuned to them. At 70, I could follow my heart's desires without overstepping the lines of rectitude. To a question of Mang Yi as to what filial piety consisted in, the Master replied, "In not being perverse." Afterwards, when Fan Ch'i was driving him, the Master informed him of his question and answer, and Fan Ch'i asked, "What was your meaning?" The Master replied, "I meant that the rules of propriety should always be adhered to in regard to those who brought us into the world; in ministering to them while living, in burying them when dead, and afterwards in the offering to them of sacrificial gifts." To a query of Mang Wu respecting filial piety, the Master replied, "Parents ought to bear but one trouble, that of their own sickness." To a like question put by Tsz yu, his reply was this: "The filial piety of the present day simply means that being able to support one's parents; which extends even to the case of dogs and horses, all of which may have something to give in the way of support. If there be no reverential feeling in the matter, what is there to distinguish between the cases?" To a like question of Tsz hiŠ, he replied, "The manner is the difficulty. If, in the case of work to be done, the younger folks simply take upon themselves the toil of it, or if, in the matter of meat and drink, they simply set these before their elders, is this to be taken as filial piety?" Once the Master remarked, "I have conversed with Hui the whole day long, and he has controverted nothing that I have said, as if he were without wits. But when his back was turned, and I looked attentively at his conduct apart from me, I found it satisfactory in all its issues. No, indeed, Hui is not without his wits." Other observations of the Master: "If you observe what things people usually take in hand, watch their motives, and note particularly what it is that gives them satisfaction, shall they be able to conceal from you what they are? Conceal themselves, indeed!" Be versed in ancient lore, and familiarize yourself with the modern. Then may you become teachers. The great man is not a mere receptacle. In reply to Tsz kung respecting the great man, what he first says as a result of his experience, he afterwards follows up. The great man is catholic-minded, and not one-sided. The common man is the reverse. Learning without thought is a snare. Thought without learning is a danger. Where the mind is set much upon heterodox principles, there truly and indeed is harm. To the disciple Tsz lu, the Master said, "Should I give you a lesson about knowledge? When you know a thing, maintain that you know it; and when you do not, acknowledge your ignorance. This is characteristic of knowledge." Tsz chang was studying with an eye to official income. The Master addressed him thus: "Of the many things you hear, hold aloof from those that are doubtful, and speak guardedly with reference to the rest. Your mistakes will then be few. Also, of the many courses you see adopted, hold aloof from those that are risky, and carefully follow the others. You will then seldom have occasion for regret. Thus, being seldom mistaken in your utterance, and have few occasions for regretting the line you take, you are on the high road to your preferment." To a question put to him by Duke Ai as to what should be done in order to render the people submissive to authority, Confucius replied, "Promote the straightforward, and reject those whose causes are crooked, and the thing will be effected. Promote the crooked, and reject the straightforward, and the effect will be the reverse." When Ki K'ang asked of him how the people could be induced to show respect, loyalty, and willingness to be led, the Master answered, "Let there be grave dignity in him who has the oversight of them, and they will show him respect. Let him be seen to be good to his own parents, and kindly in disposition, and they will be loyal to him. Let him promote those who have ability, and see to the instruction of those who have it not, and they will be willing to be led." Some one, speaking to Confucius, inquired, "Why, sir, are you not an administrator of government?" The Master rejoined, "What says the Book of the Annals with reference to filial duty? 'Make it a point to be dutiful to your parents and amicable with your brethren. The same duties extend to an administrator.' If these then also make an administrator, how am I to take your words about being an administrator?" On one occasion the Master remarked, "I know not what men are good for, on whose word no reliance can be placed. How should your carriages, large or little, get along without your whipple trees or swing trees?" Tsz chang asked if it were possible to forecast the state of the country 10 generations hence. The Master replied in this manner: "The Yin dynasty adopted the rules and manners of the Hsia line of kings, and it is possible to tell whether it retrograded or advanced. The Chow line has followed the Yin, adopting its ways, and whether there has been deterioration or improvement may also be determined. Some other line may take up in turn those of Chow, and supposing even this process to go on for 100 generations, the result may be known." Other sayings of the Master: "It is but flattery to make sacrificial offerings to departed spirits not belonging to one's own family. It is moral cowardice to leave undone what one perceives to be right to do." Footnote regarding Duke Ai of Lu, Confucius' native state. Footnote about Ki K'ang, head of one of the 3 families of Lu. End of Book 2. Book 3 of the Analects of Confucius. Abuse of proprieties in ceremonial and music. Alluding to the head of the Chi family, and the 8 lines of postures before their ancestral hall, Confucius remarked, "If the Chi can allow himself to go to this extent, to what extent will he not allow himself to go?" The 3 families were in the habit, during the removal of the sacred vessels after sacrifice, of using the hymn commencing, Harmoniously the princes draw near with reverent tread, assisting in his worship Heaven's Son, the great and dread. "How," exclaimed the Master, "can such words be appropriated in the ancestral hall of the three families?" "Where a man," said he again, "has not the proper feelings due from one man to another, how will he stand as regards the rules of propriety? And in such a case, what shall we say of his sense of harmony?" On a question being put to him by Lin Fang, a disciple, as to what was the radical idea upon which the rules of propriety were based, the Master exclaimed, "Ah, that is a large question. As to some rules, where there is likelihood of extravagance, they would rather demand economy. In those which relate to mourning, and where there is likelihood of being easily satisfied, what is wanted is real sorrow." Speaking of the disorder of the times, he remarked that, while the barbarians on the north and east had their chieftains, we here in this great country had nothing to compare with them in that respect. We had lost these distinctions. Alluding to the matter of the chief of the Chi family worshipping on Tai shan, the Master said to Yen Yu, "Cannot you save him from this?" He replied, "It is beyond my power." "Alas, alas!" exclaimed the Master, "are we to say that the spirits of Tai shan have not as much discernment as Lin Fang?" "Of the superior man," the Master observed, "in him there is no contentiousness. Say even that he does certainly contend with others, as in archery competitions, yet mark, in that case, how courteously he will bow and go up for the forfeit cup, and come down again and give it to his competitor. In his very contest he is still the superior man." Tsze hsia once inquired what inference might be drawn from the lines, "Dimples playing in witching smile, beautiful eyes, so dark, so bright. Oh, and her face may be thought the while colored by art, red rose on white." "Coloring," replied the Master, "requires a pure and clear background." "Then," said the other, "rules of ceremony require to have a background." "Ah!" exclaimed the Master, "you are the man to catch the drift of my thought. Such as you may well introduce a discussion on the Odes." Said the Master, "As regards the ceremonial adopted and enforced by the Hsia dynasty, I am able to describe it, although their own descendants in the state of Ch'i can adduce no adequate testimony in favor of its use there. So, too, I am able to describe the ceremonial of the Yin dynasty, although no more can the Sung people show sufficient reason for its continuance amongst themselves. And why cannot they do so? Because they have not documents enough, nor men learned enough. If only they had such, I could refer them to them in support of their usages." "When I am present at the great quinquennial sacrifice to the manes of the royal ancestors," the Master said, "from the pouring out of the oblation onwards, I have no heart to look on." Some one asked what was the purport of this great sacrifice, and the Master replied, "I cannot tell. The position in the empire of him who could tell you is as evident as when you look at this," pointing to the palm of his hand. When he offered sacrifices to his ancestors, he used to act as if they were present before him. In offering to other spirits, it was the same. He would say, "If I do not myself take part in my offerings, it is all the same as if I did not offer them." Wang Sun Chia asked him once, "What says the proverb, 'Better to court favor in the kitchen than in the drawing room'?" The Master replied, "Nay, better say, 'He who has sinned against heaven has none other to whom prayer may be addressed.'" Of the Chow dynasty the Master remarked, "It looks back upon two other dynasties, and what a rich possession it has in its records of those times. I follow Chow." On his first entry into the Grand Temple, he inquired about every matter connected with its usages. Some one thereupon remarked, "Who says that the son of the man of Chau understands about ceremonial?" On entering the grand temple, he inquired about everything. This remark coming to the Master's ears, he said, "What I did is part of the ceremonial." In archery, he said, "The great point to be observed is not simply the perforation of the leather, for men have not all the same strength. That was the fashion in the olden days." Once, seeing that his disciple Tsz kung was desirous that the ceremonial observance of offering a sheep at the new moon might be dispensed with, the Master said, "Ah, you grudge the loss of the sheep, I grudge the loss of the ceremony." "To serve one's ruler nowadays," he remarked, "fully complying with the rules of propriety, is regarded by others as toadyism." When Duke Ting questioned him as to how a prince should deal with his ministers, and how they, in turn, should serve their prince, Confucius said in reply, "In dealing with his ministers, a prince should observe the proprieties. In serving his prince, a minister should observe the duty of loyalty." Referring to the first of the odes, he remarked that "it was mirthful without being lewd, and sad also without being painful." Duke Ai asked the disciple Tsai Wo respecting the places for sacrificing to the earth. The latter replied, "The family of the great Yu of the Sha dynasty chose a place of pine trees; the Yin founders chose cypresses; and the Chow founders chestnut trees, solemn and majestic, to inspire, 'tis said, the people with feelings of awe." The Master on hearing of this exclaimed, "Never an allusion to things that have been enacted in the past! Never a remonstrance against what is now going on! He has gone away without a word of censure." The Master once said of Kwan Chung, "A small-minded man indeed." "Was he miserly?" some one asked. "Miserly indeed," said he. "Not that. He married 3 times, and he was not a man who restricted his official business to too few hands. How could he be miserly?" "He knew the rules of propriety, I suppose. Judge. Seeing that the feudal lords planted a screen at their gates, he too would have one at his. Seeing that when any two of the feudal lords met in friendly conclave they had an earthenware stand on which to place their inverted cups after drinking, he must have the same. If he knew the rules of propriety, who is there that does not know them?" In a discourse to the chief preceptor of music at the court of Lu, the Master said, "Music is an intelligible thing. When you begin a performance, let all the various instruments produce as it were one sound, inharmonious. Then, as you go on, bring out the harmony fully, distinctly, and with uninterrupted flow, unto the end." The warden of the border town of Yi requested an interview with Confucius, and said, "When great men have come here, I have never yet failed to obtain a sight of them." The followers introduced him, and, on leaving, he said to them, "Sirs, why grieve at his loss of office? The empire has for long been without good government, and heaven is about to use your master as its edict announcer." Comparing the music of the Emperor Shun with the music of Chin Wu, the Master said, "That of Shun is beautiful throughout, and also good throughout. That of Wu is all of it beautiful, but scarcely all of it good." "High station," said the Master, "occupied by men who have no large and generous heart, ceremonial performed with no reverence, duties of mourning engaging the attention where there is absence of sorrow, how should I look on where this is the state of things?" Footnote regarding the Chi family. The chief of the Chi clan was virtually the Duke of Lu, under whom Confucius for a time held office. Footnote regarding posturers. These posturers were mutes who took part in the ritual of the ancestral temple, waving plumes, flags, etc. Each line or rank of these contained 8 men. Only in the sovereign's household should there have been 8 lines of them. A ducal family like the Ki should have had but 6 lines. A great official had 4, and one of lower grade 2. These were the gradations marking the status of families, and Confucius' sense of propriety was offended by the Ki's usurping in this way the appearance of royalty. Footnote regarding the 3 families. 3 great families related to each other, in whose hands the government of the state of Lu then was, and of which the Ki was the chief. Footnote regarding Taishan. One of the 5 sacred mountains, worshipped upon only by the sovereign. Footnote regarding the men of Tsou. Tsou was Confucius' birthplace. His father was governor of the town. Footnote regarding Guanzhong. A renowned statesman who flourished about 200 years before Confucius' time. A philosophical work on law and government, said to have been written by him, is still extant. He was regarded as a sage by the people, but he lacked, in Confucius' eyes, the one thing needful, propriety. End of Book 3. Book 4 of the Analects of Confucius. Social Virtue, Superior and Inferior Man. Sayings of the Master. It is social good feeling that gives charm to a neighborhood. And where is the wisdom of those who choose an abode where it does not abide? Those who are without it cannot abide long, either in straitened or in happy circumstances. Those who possess it find contentment in it. Those who are wise go after it as men go after gain. Only they in whom it exists can have right likings and dislikings for others. Where the will is set upon it, there will be no room for malpractices. Riches and honors are what men desire, but if they arrive at them by improper ways, they should not continue to hold them. Poverty and low estate are what men dislike, but if they arrive at such a condition by improper ways, they should not refuse it. If the superior man make naught of social good feeling, how shall he fully bear that name? Not even whilst he eats his meal will the superior man forget what he owes to his fellow men. Even in hurried leave-takings, even in moments of frantic confusion, he keeps true to his virtue. I have not yet seen a lover of philanthropy nor a hater of misanthropy, such that the former did not take occasion to magnify that virtue in himself, and that the latter, in his positive practice of philanthropy, did not, at times, allow in his presence something savoring of misanthropy. Say you, is there any one who is able for one whole day to apply the energy of his mind to this virtue? Well, I have not seen any one whose energy was not equal to it. It may be there are such, but I have never met with them. The faults of individuals are peculiar to their particular class and surroundings, and it is by observing their faults that one comes to understand the condition of their good feelings towards their fellows. One may hear the right way in the morning, and at evening die. The scholar who is intent upon learning the right way, and who is yet ashamed of poor attire and poor food, is not worthy of being discoursed with. The masterly man's attitude to the world is not exclusively this or that. Whatsoever is right, to that he will be a party. The masterly man has an eye to virtue, the common man to earthly things. The former has an eye to penalties for error, the latter to favor. Where there is habitual going after gain, there is much ill will. When there is ability in a ruler to govern a country by adhering to the rules of propriety, and by kindly condescension, what is wanted more? Where the ability to govern thus is wanting, what has such a ruler to do with the rules of propriety? One should not be greatly concerned at not being in office, but rather about the requirements in one's self for such a standing. Neither should one be so much concerned at being unknown, but rather with seeking to become worthy of being known." Addressing his disciple Tsang Shen, the Master said, "Tsang Shen, the principles which are inculate have one main idea upon which they all hang." "Aye, surely," he replied. When the Master was gone out, the other disciples asked what was the purport of this remark. Tsang's answer was, "The principles of our Master's teaching are these: whole-heartedness and kindly forbearance, these and nothing more." Other observations of the Master: "Men of loftier mind manifest themselves in their equitable dealings; small-minded men in their going after gain. When you meet with men of worth, think how you may attain to their level. When you see others of an opposite character, look within, and examine yourself." A son, in ministering to his parents, may on occasion offer gentle remonstrances. When he sees that their will is not to heed such, he should nevertheless still continue to show them reverent respect, never obstinacy. And if he have to suffer, let him do so without murmuring. Whilst the parents are still living, he should not wander far; or, if a wanderer, he should at least have some fixed address. If for 3 years he do not veer from the principles of his father, he may be called a dutiful son. A son should not ignore the years of his parents. On the one hand, there may be a matter for rejoicing that they have been so many, and on the other, for apprehension that so few remain. People in olden times were loath to speak out, fearing the disgrace of not being themselves as good as their words. Those who keep within restraints are seldom losers. To be slow to speak, but prompt to act, is the desire of the superior man. Virtue dwells not alone; she must have neighbors. An observation of Tsz yu: "Officiousness, in the service of princes, leads to disgrace; among friends, to estrangement." End of Book 4.